Right now, as you listen to these words, there is a voice in your head commenting on them. It might be agreeing, disagreeing, getting distracted, judging the delivery, or wondering where this is going. That voice never stops. It has an opinion about everything. And here's what makes this remarkable. You believe that voice is you. But what if the single greatest trap that causes human beings to lose peace is mistaking that voice for their actual identity? What research into consciousness reveals, and what has been observed across therapeutic practices and introspective disciplines, is that most people spend their entire lives hijacked by an internal commentator they never questioned. This voice claims to be you. It speaks with your authority, but studies of human cognition show something unexpected. The constant narrator running in your mind is a constructed identity, not your essential nature. If that voice is not you, then who is listening to it? And if we have been taking orders from an imposter, how much of our suffering comes from this case of mistaken identity? Subscribe to One Paradox Collective as we investigate what consciousness research and depth psychology reveal about the architecture of identity, the mechanisms creating human suffering, and what exists beneath the noise. Research into human cognition reveals something about how we perceive reality. We experience only a thin layer of what exists, like seeing merely the tip of an iceberg. The vast mass remains hidden beneath the surface, obscured from our view. Language gives us the illusion that we understand what things are. However, words are profoundly limited tools for capturing the fullness of experience. Studies have demonstrated that when we attempt to describe deeply felt experiences, language fails. This is particularly true for emotions like love or profound insight. What neuroscience research has revealed is that we trust our thoughts absolutely. We believe that the constant stream of internal dialogue represents reality. Between what we think and what actually is, there exists an enormous distance. We define everything in words, phrases, concepts, labels, and ideas. However, these definitions create only superficial representations of reality. The word gives us comfort, the illusion of knowing, but it separates us. It separates us from direct experience of what is truly happening. Various contemplative traditions have taught to approach truth. We must detach. We must detach from the ideas we have mixed with our essential nature. The more we define ourselves and our experience through thought, the further we move. What practices of self-inquiry discovered is that we gain intellectual capacity. However, we lose the genuine ability to appreciate existence with freshness. We lose lightness and wisdom in our understanding of reality. We no longer live to feel what things actually are. Instead, we idealize what we believe they should be. We live on the surface of everything, reducing all reality. We reduce all reality to what our limited conceptual mind can grasp. Research into child development and identity formation shows that from early childhood, we learn a word that creates profound confusion. The word is simply I. Parents and caregivers begin defining who we are with labels. You are quiet, intelligent, difficult, calm, irritable, happy, or sad. This word I becomes the foundation of identity, though what it represents is entirely illusory. What developmental psychology has revealed is that we initiate a process of mistaken identity that becomes the database we use to interpret the world, ourselves, and others. Initially, your name summarizes you. Then another word enters the formation of what psychology calls the ego, the word mine. Studies of human conflict, from individual disputes to international wars, show that this word mine plays a central role in the genesis of suffering. Whenever we lose something we have labeled as mine, we suffer. We identify with objects, a term used in psychoanalysis to describe people and things to which we have emotional attachment, as if they form part of who we are, part of our identity. When we lose them, we experience it as losing part of ourselves. What research across multiple cultures demonstrates is that we begin a process of separation. We identify with nationality, religion, profession, roles like spouse or parent, with our opinions and preferences. We define I and my unique story. All of this appears to summarize who we are, yet these are merely mental constructions, thought patterns, ego identity. We define ourselves and identify with thoughts about ourselves, thoughts that exist only internally, not in external reality. Research into self-perception reveals remarkable distortions. Some people define themselves as far more than they are. others as far less. These are false ideas about identity that cause people to hide from reality. Studies have shown that if we do not believe in what we are in essence, we cannot live that essence because it has not been defined in our mental framework. This is why it is often said that we become what we believe ourselves to be, limiting ourselves to those beliefs while remaining unconscious of this truth. You know that internal dialogue that never stops? That chattering voice that constantly offers opinions, usually not positive ones? What psychological research and contemplative traditions have both observed is that this voice represents an identity that has taken possession of us. The ego masquerades as our true self, a voice that maintains endless streams of conflictual thoughts, uncomfortable with situations, predicting problems. It is fearful of being taken advantage of experiencing need, of being betrayed, forgotten, despised, or insulted. Studies of anxiety and stress reveal that fear dominates this internal entity, repeating these thoughts incessantly. It can drive us toward mental disturbance because it allows nothing to pass without voicing its fears. But what causes the ego to manifest with such fear? Research into ego psychology shows this occurs because we lack adequate structure. This structure is necessary to support this part of our psyche, as established in psychological theory. The ego is the part of our psyche responsible for mediating between internal and external worlds. It serves as our connection to what exists outside ourselves. When the ego feels threatened and insecure without proper support, it feels abandoned. It is as if telling you that you do not see it or resolve its difficulties. An unsupported ego resembles a wild animal trapped in a small cage, becoming increasingly agitated. What is the ego requesting? Solutions, responses to its insecurities. To perform its mediating function, the ego requires support, internal resources that facilitate secure and light interpretation. These interpretations apply to all situations occurring both within us, like our conflicts, desires, and fears. They also apply outside us in our relationships with the world. What research into psychological resilience demonstrates is that these resources include our values, ethics, and tools. These tools include compassion, forgiveness, understanding, serenity, good judgment, peace, faith, joy, and positive outlook. If the ego lacks strong structure sustained through these resources, it will employ numerous defense mechanisms. These mechanisms are desperate attempts to maintain control and avoid panic. They manifest as pride, arrogance, inferiority, or superiority complexes, desire for power, greed, avarice, ambition. They also include the desire to manipulate everything and everyone, and fear, all of which disturb our peace. The voice in our head represents one of the strongest resources the ego employs to manifest these defense mechanisms. Through these mechanisms, we create a completely distorted vision of reality. These are filters that distance us from what is actually happening outside and within us. What contemplative practices across traditions have discovered is that one way to address this disturbing voice is to break identification with thoughts. To not believe implicitly in what it tells us silences the mind and facilitates deeper perception of who we actually are. What psychological research reveals is that the ego mind is conditioned by the past. The ego comprises both content and structure, which are essential to its function. Content represents the object itself, which can be constantly changed over time. Research into attachment shows that a child who loses a toy can replace it. What binds us to the object, the word mine, that is structural in nature. The association of the toy with identity itself represents the concept of structure. Identification is the mental structure that enables ego exacerbation in individuals. The word identification comes from Latin roots, meaning to make the same. We make the object the same as ourselves, part of our identity and existence. What studies of human psychology consistently demonstrate is our search for identity. This is the nature of ego, operating through separation and identification mechanisms. For the ego to maintain itself, it requires its opposite, which is the other. If we felt unified with all beings, the ego would cease to exist entirely. To protect itself, the ego defines everything outside itself as enemy and threat. Research into conflict psychology shows how this mechanism enables the ego's survival. This explains why we perceive so many faults in others to elevate ourselves. Wars begin this way. Condemning the other makes us feel stronger and justified. What various psychological and spiritual traditions have observed is the ego's nature. The ego constructs competition, mistrust, comparison, prejudice, and arrogance in belief. Complaints play an important role in the definition and maintenance of the ego. Labeling others, harboring resentment, and complaining serve to maintain the ego's structure. Studies of interpersonal conflict show that this resembles treating disease as enemy. Research into forgiveness and compassion demonstrates seeing beyond ego construction. When we view others as potential enemies, we react to their egos defensively. When we defend our truths with absolute conviction, we strengthen the ego structure. When we hold grudges by retelling unhappy stories, we reinforce our separation. What has been taught across therapeutic and contemplative traditions is crucial. Recognizing these patterns represents the first step toward liberation from identity. What consciousness research and depth psychology both reveal is that the greatest trap causing us to lose peace is not knowing who we truly are. Worse still is deceiving ourselves about who we are. We become hostages to ourselves, to our weaknesses, to ignorance of our true nature. This makes us vulnerable to every storm. For everything that happens to us, we assign emotional meaning. That meaning, not the event itself, creates either well-being or distress. Studies across psychology, neuroscience, and contemplative traditions point to the same insight. When we give the voice in our head absolute authority, when we identify completely with the constructed self, we create our own suffering. The abundance of joy and inner peace that research shows exists within human consciousness remains hidden behind filters of thought and false identity. Many answers we seek cannot be found through intellectual understanding alone. Consciousness itself plays a vital role in this process. Thought without consciousness makes our conclusions superficial and conflictual. This represents one of humanity's central dilemmas. The difference between those we call disturbed and ourselves is merely a matter of degree. They speak aloud to themselves. Our minds speak internally. They display exaggerated emotions. We do too, but hide them. We all live in a theater simulated by ego, just to different degrees. Here is the question for investigation. In what ways have you noticed the voice in your head creating separation, either from yourself or from others? Share your observations in the comments as we collectively explore this terrain. Subscribe to One Paradox Collective for investigations into consciousness, ego structures, and the nature of identity. We do not promise certainty about who you are. We promise better questions about who you are not.